So here we go. Back to our slide. We begin with a journey through what does it mean to use technology to experience inspiration? What does it mean to use the technologies available to us to be advancing sacred pursuits? So the scroll as an ancient technology was the first place that we caught words and letters of the texts that people memorized in a more solid and retrievable technology. And we could open them up and we could see what was written. And it wasn't for each individual to have his or her remembrance of the text. It was really this way, a technology that served the purpose of unifying us around books, around texts, around words of inspiration, around prayers, around stories. You know, technology in the regular world of humanity, let's say, also has stories, right? Every technology is part of a story. A stone axe, for instance, lets us chop wood and make fires. A stone axe also can help crush and cut the meat we need to eat from animals, and between the fire and the way we cut the pieces, we've actually now got a technology in our hand, the stone axe, that replaces our sharp teeth. We don't have to tear, and we don't have to, and over time, humans themselves become different because of the technology that's created. We change our own experience and the physical and the spiritual who we are by the technologies that we create and we engage. And that's an important part of this whole story as we consider sacred experience in virtual space. We know that technologies really change things because once we have scrolls, and once those scrolls become scrolls that preserve our words and they're durable enough, we start to make rituals that engage the new technology that probably were scary for some of the first ancestors out there to use scrolls to read instead of just reciting books. And of course, from this Dead Sea Scrolls and individual scrolls of the Tanakh, we're talking about having two posts upon which an entire Torah is rolled, as opposed to having one Chumash rolled up in a box of what looks like architectural plans. It's a technology. And so our engagement with certain technologies makes sense. But did you know that Jews actually refused and decidedly, I'm sorry, I'm admitting somebody. Jews refused to use the Codex when it first was developed in the early centuries after the turn of the Common Era. We said it's halachically impermissible to read from a codex, and codices did not become part of the technologies that we really accepted within the history of the Jewish people. As a matter of fact, the early Christian church fathers create a more portable religion. And one of the reasons, if you want to talk about material history of religion, one of the reasons why the Christian ideas spread is not only because of letters being delivered, but because codices carry the New Testament. We wanted a little bit more of an intimate experience with the people who could come and read Torah from the scroll. We didn't put it into alternative languages, despite the fact that we've got traditions of translations of our sacred scriptures. We hold fast to our sacred scriptures, and we had a certain way of reading them from the scroll versus accepting this new technology. So in the blood of Jewish folk from the rabbinic era forward is the acceptance of certain new technologies and the rejection of other technologies that reduce the intimacy of the experience and the abilities of readers and prayers to experience in smaller areas and in sanctuary precincts the kind of worship that we ultimately deem appropriate. And worship for us, as you know, is not only just praying from the heart, it is reading from our Torah scrolls and hearing a lesson from them and about them And we kept fast to that to this day, right? Torah scrolls are beautiful. The one that I had on the screen before was a handwritten scroll available for $18,000 on the Etsy website, if anybody wants to put a bid on it. I just found it today. So you can go there. Actually available. Handwritten Torah scroll on Etsy. The rejection of certain technologies doesn't hold for Sidurim. What could be the earliest known Sidur, found in the Afghanistan region, dates to about 840 CE, making it a Gaonic era piece of technology that puts our prayers together and that collects them. And the Sidur, as technology that is obviously in codex form, becomes at least available to scholars and prayer leaders before the printed book, so that we can make liturgies that seem to be more unified throughout the Jewish world. Now, I want to read to you from Robert Cover, because I'm already mentioning that Jewish law really helps us define how we relate to technologies. And Cover's work in nomos and narrative, meaning there are stories behind the law, he'll say, we inhabit a nomos. We create a normative universe. Our normative universe in our Orzarua community is a universe where our lives and modernity define who we are and all that New York City has to offer, and what we wear is contemporary and all of that. But also we do have a deep relationship to the law that is a framework for our lives, Jewish law. We constantly create and maintain a world of right and wrong, of lawful and unlawful, of valid and void. The student of law may come to identify the normative world with the professional paraphernalia of social control. The rules and principles of justice, the formal institutions of the law, and the conventions of a social order are indeed important to that world. They are, however, but a small part of the normative universe that ought to claim our attention. What does that mean? It means that a rabbi who's making halachic decisions might be part of our normative universe. The rabbi who's making decisions will have a committee on Jewish law and standards to refer to as a set of decision-making bodies. That Committee on Jewish Law and Standards may also be in dialogue with other committees on Jewish law and standards in other Jewish movements. This is the normative universe we've created as Jews. And it's a beautiful universe that holds on to a legal framework that creates rights and wrongs and laws and unlawful practices. And so that is an inspiring way of living for a Jewish community connected to that ancient set of narratives. And it goes beyond, of course, those laws of what's right and what's wrong, meaning that it's a lived tradition. Given a generation, every generation has to make new decisions based on the realities that that generation really sees and faces. History and literature cannot escape their location in a normative universe, nor can prescription, even when embodied in a legal text. So there are laws, but there are realities. There are historical unfoldings going on, and law can be brought forward to really help the experience be defined as either lawful or unlawful, as either right or wrong, as either valid or void. And this is Robert Cover, the great legal historian's great contribution to helping us see this in our time. What we do in the synagogue on a routine basis is part of that real, lawful narrative that helps our personal stories unfold, that creates a framework for joy and for sorrow, for remembering, for taking personal accountings, for having quiet space amidst the craziness of New York City. I love our sanctuary. I love our sanctuary for all that is and for all we do there. And this year, actually, pictures of our sanctuary will be on the screen for the high holidays as opposed to Wallace Hall, because we'll be in our sanctuary leading from there. So the cameras will show it, and those of us present will be in it. We'll make for quite a different, inspiring place from which we daven, place from which we broadcast this year on those 3 specific days. I put the blue arrow down here at the bottom because you see, now I'm into some halachic considerations. What's the law got to say about making these minions? And I'll go through this in a little bit of a faster form when it comes to the laws about minyan, daily minyan, but I wanted you to have a sense of kind of the legal framework that we're working in. I didn't just decide the minute after the pandemic really started and people said we were going to be in the house for a long time. Before any movement really decided that Zoom minyanim were going to be kosher, I for sure during the week when, for me, electronics, there was no question we could use them. And now we had this synchronous software with Zoom that we could both see each other and hear each other in living time. That to me, it made total sense to call for a full minyan to happen over the Zoom lines. And I was, if you will, among the first in the movement and with some of the folks on the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards already dialoguing with folks about some of the reasoning that I'm going to share with you tonight about why I said that immediately. I felt that this new software afforded us that opportunity during the week. Now let me begin with a little theoretical outside the Jewish world. I started to see the potential for the Zoom space that we're actually on right now as creating some kind of definitive space for sacred pursuits in the context of sacred architecture throughout the ages. This is a very famous book about architectural patterns that were noticed in terms of our building cities and building settlements and building towns and villages by scholars Christopher Alexander and Murray Silverstein and Sarah Ishikawa. In functional terms, it is essential that each person have the opportunity to enter into some kind of social communion with his fellows at the times when he himself or his friends pass through these critical points in their lives. So they're talking about here critical life cycle events, what we might call life cycle events in religious terms. So they want physical places where people can share in the life cycle events that happen in our lives, or holidays, like the upcoming holidays. What physical shape or organization must this gateway have in order to support the rites of passage and in order to create the sanctity and holiness and feeling of connection to the earth, which makes the rites significant? Of course, it will vary in detail from culture to culture. Whatever it is exactly that is held to be sacred, whether it is nature, God, a special place, a spirit, holy relics, the earth itself, or an idea, it takes different forms in different cultures and requires different physical environments to support it. Now, the one we're familiar with has in some way some of the characteristics that they styled here in their drawings. They said sacred space has an entrance and an outside court and an inner court and then an inner court. And then finally, there's an innermost sanctum. If I were to argue from this source that you really do need the physical journey and going through doorways and entranceways and outer courtyards and inner courtyards and finally to an innermost sanctum. And that innermost sanctum, I think for us in our sacred architecture, is the Aron HaKodesh itself. We keep it closed and then open it with a ceremony. I would say that if this was the law and the only potential, and they didn't know about sacred space on a virtual platform at this point in history in 1979, it was only a thought in their mind. I would say that, of course, this defines how we've built our synagogues, how we've built Or Zarua, and how we've based that, of course, on the Jerusalem temple in our tradition. Here, in the drawing now, you've got the gateways, the beautiful gate, and then the outer court, and then you go through the next gate, and you've got the inner court, but then you've got the steps into the inner court, and then you finally got the absolute Holy of Holies. And when we want to think about whether or not we can achieve sacred experience within virtual space, in a little bit of a way, and I'm wondering about this out loud for you, I find it even more sacred when I don't just pop up on the screen and I see my face. Actually, when I'm in the waiting room and someone lets me into either a lecture or a service, it actually makes a difference. And how these programs will ultimately afford us some type of experience that bows to the thousands of years of sacred architecture being built over the ages. We've yet to discover that entirely. A waiting room or no waiting room, we're not there yet. I don't think that the Zoom platform, either in this platform or what we're going to use for streaming, has totally gotten to a place where it feels like you're really walking into the sacred landscape of a synagogue. But I am suggesting that, who knows, given our understandings of how we've built sacred space over time, we just may be able to get there. This architecture of the temple in the Gemara in Eruvin, the source on the screen, it created a debate. Can someone who's leading from one room really be the leader when everybody else is standing in the other room? And what if the prayer leader was in the small one, but the congregation was in the large one? The Gemara says they do fulfill their obligation. And if the congregation was in the small courtyard and the prayer leader was in the large one, they don't. So it seems like there's already this debate. What if we're not in the same exact rooms? And there's only a little gateway. Well, this Gemara came to my mind immediately when we went into pandemic mode and we knew we wanted to pray still during the week. And so halachically, I started to see that we didn't have to be, quote unquote, in the exact same physical space, even though everybody was gathered in the physical temple. And you could tell me, if you want to say halachically, look, it's not the same as being in physical space as it is in virtual space, period. That's one way to go halachically, and I can't argue with you. But if I'm going to apply the sources halachically to our situation, I want to be able to have some of that flexibility based on the historical reality, a la what Robert Covert was saying. Our history is very different these days. Technology is not even like in the 20th century, so much a choice anymore. So people are sometimes only based in technology. How many times have I had to go register something on a website because I can't get a person anymore with a phone call? It's becoming a little bit of a different interface in our lives. Now, the Rambam gives support to anyone who says it just can't be replaced, the temple. Well, you're right. The temple can't be replaced. The place of the temple was very well defined and is never to be changed. You don't change the place of the temple. That's true. We don't change the place of the temple. But we have the tradition, as we know, of the Mikdash Me'at, of the mini temple. And we created synagogues that don't exactly look like the temple, but again, have that sacred architecture. And so we've got now this programming that allows us some interface, and people kind of come in and they have to go through steps to get in. And we wind up seeing each other in addition to hearing each other. And that created, again, more openness to feeling like we could potentially be in this sacred experience. You see the green arrow is there. And the blue arrow, that halachically I might be able to get that feeling that a real minyan is present using this new, potentially sacred architecture of the Zoom space, right? I am in a box, as are many of you. And I can do this and kind of feel like I'm in that box. And if you do the same, I invite you to just try to feel like physically you're in this space with me, right? Just like I'm going to say when you're looking at your screens for the high holidays, I want you to even feel, project yourself kind of in that space of the Or Zarua sanctuary and in the space of whatever courtyard the Zoom space becomes. And here, this possibility for a minyan led me to really think, okay, is Zoom just like this good old radio where I listen to my favorite, Yosela Greenblatt singing across the airwaves and feel like I'm part of something? Or is it different? Is the experience different on Zoom and makes for a better experience, sacred experience, and therefore I have potential for a minyan? Because when it did come to this kind of experience of just listening to the latest technology that was available when that radio was available as the only technology and they didn't have any kind of computer screen, of course, we have sources that did forbid it. It wasn't good enough. And we have אי-אפשר כלל לצאת בשמיעה זו בשום דבר שחייבים לשמוע מפי אדם. It's required that you hear from a human being the kind of prayers that we're talking about when we're asking if we can feel like we've fulfilled our prayers through hearing a broadcast. ואף שיודע אני רבים יתמחו על כך, וכמו זר יהיה דבר זה בעיניהם עם כל. And he says, I know that there are those who, with the world of broadcasting, are going to really take up this issue and say, maybe it's potentially something we could live with. זאת האמת הוא כדברנו ברור הוא בעיניי שזה מוזר רק לאלה שאינם יודעים כלל. That those who don't really know the essence of prayer are saying we ought to be able to listen to the radio to fulfill our obligations. And they're really not doing what is the classic version of prayer as we know it. שאינם יודעים כלל מה טיבם של המכשירים האלה וחושבים מחשבות הבל, שחוטי הטלפון או גלי הרדיו מוליכים ממש את כל האדם. What they think is that the lines of the radio and the lines of telephones and that the lines of broadcasting, the broadcast itself, is really bringing alive the actual voice of people and allowing you to truly fulfill your prayers. And so when they had just the radio, you see that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach forbids it, and Rav Al Yashav and Rav Avadia Yosef and some of these sources that, yes, even in our world of, you want to call it conservative Judaism, you want to call it the Rabbinical Assembly's Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, all these sources are taken very seriously to try to uncover and discover the halachic histories that really relate to our questions of whether or not the Zoom platforms and the streaming platforms are very different from these kinds of first technologies that we had available, which is the radio. And you see the beginning, though, of this slide says, the issue in regard to whether one may respond with Amen, Baruch Hu, or reciting Kedusha has been addressed before in terms of answering these via a telephone or a live radio broadcast. The Minchat Elazar permits answering a Davar Sheb Kedusha on the phone. So we found in looking at this one source regarding the broadcasting that was going on over the phones or radios, that there was at least one source that did permit it, but we had other authorities like Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Eli Yashav and Rav Avadia who said, no, really you couldn't do that because they think that these devices are actually bringing the true human experience to the prayers, and I just can't see permitting it. And therefore you've got already, in terms of modernity, the machloket, the argumentation going. Rabbi Avraham Reisner of the conservative movement went along with Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and he said, what we do on the Zoom lines and what we do on the telephones is not kosher. Before even the Zoom technology came, his ruling was, for sure with a phone, you can't constitute a minyan, and for sure with radio, it doesn't constitute true prayer to which you could say amen. And he was basing himself on the fact that A, it wasn't the real voice, and B, you couldn't see each other. But that all changes for me, and even for Reb Avi, who I know, when, look here, we're seeing one another. Here, by the way, you could see me actually taking the picture of the ongoing class over here. This is Torah study, and this one's minyan. People you see, and he's in tefillin, and he's leading. So the question is, does it change when I have this interactive software? And how do I make a decision about whether or not I feel like people are really present in a room? There are sources that said that when people are in different rooms, and now I'm thinking about the Zoom sacred architecture again, as being like we're in a room with one another, we're in windows with one another. When I have these sources in front of me, I say, oh, interesting. There are certain sources that say with a shiva, if people are in different rooms of a house, I can constitute a minyan. That's the Aruch HaShulchan. One may be in an adjoining room in a shiva home to participate in a minyan. And the Gemara tells us, remember back to cover, with the idea that there are stories about us trying to put together a life of law, a Jewish legal way of being. Here's the history. He tells us that there were several places, there was a shul in Alexandria in Egypt that had such a large attendance that people would stand on step ladders and wave flags as to when to respond to the various blessings in Shemona Esrei. So there are people kind of behind the shul, even saying amen. And so we see that the stories are out there that we can consider that give us historical moments when we had to consider whether people could actually be together physically and when they weren't, and if the radio is okay, and if the broadcasting is all right, and what happens when you're in different spaces. And now that I've got this new technology, I've got to start thinking about whether or not there's enough sacred space here and we're really in a window with one another to have a minyan. It all came back to a Mishnah in Psachim, which said from the jamb of the door inwards, it counts as inside, and from the jamb of the door outwards counts as outside. The windows and the thickness of the wall count as inside. Hachalonot v'ovei choma kilifnim. And because these little windows in Zoom for the weekday minyan, when we could use electronics, created the kind of togetherness that we needed, both in terms of seeing each other and hearing each other, we could constitute a minyan. And if you've been to Daily Minyan, you'll note that I ask for at least 10 people to be present, and not only through voice, but through facial recognition. And that became the way that the whole conservative movement ruled, using this Mishnah that I told you about and this Shulchan Aruch piece. If one is standing outside the synagogue and there's a window between them, even if it is several stories high and even if it is less than 4 cubits wide, and the individual is shown to them within the window, the individual is counted with them towards the 10, towards the minyan. And that is what is possible in Haifa. There's the Masorti Shul in Haifa, the conservative synagogue in Haifa. This is one of the few synagogues I found that actually has just plain windows where people could even be outside, and they're using the outside now to have some people participate in their minyanim. And this is what the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards said. My teacher, Rabbi Dorff, was among the writers of this. He says, in this crisis situation in an area in which civil or medical authorities decree that it's unsafe for people to gather in person and recommend or order the closure of houses of worship, it is permitted to constitute a minyan whose constitutive participants are not located in one physical place. Some of us hold that an emergency situation that we are now experiencing, people participating in a minyan that is only online, may recite Devarim Shebekidusha, In other words, we may say all of the prayers that are necessary, prayers that require a minyan with their community. The participants counted for the minyan, here's the line, must be able to see and hear each other through virtual means and be able to respond amen and other liturgical replies to the prayer leader. So that becomes then the decision of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. There are no dissenting views. This is a letter for guidance, leaving it to the local rabbi, who's called a mar de'atara, the local decisor, leaving it to the local decisor to comply with the unified guidance of the movement, which is different than having tshuvot, responsa, because usually with responsa in our movement, there are those majority opinions and there are those minority opinions. Majority opinions that will say it's kosher to do it this way, and minority opinions that will say it's not kosher. But in this case, this was a unanimous letter of guidance for local rabbis to decide. I had already thought the exact same line of thinking and talked with some of my colleagues on the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. And so therefore we're doing minyan because of these windows and because of this potential that this Zoom platform and synchronous face and voice, same time, live time software creates the sacred architecture that we need. Now, if you only had little pictures of sacred objects, I just happen to love William J. Bolton's work. This one happens to be in the Met. If you've not seen it in person, I highly recommend when you can get there. You know, if you had windows and little symbols for people on screen that even tried to create some sacred kind of inspiring sense of presence, then it would not be kosher enough for us. We're not thinking about this sacred space as being, you know, symbolic with different kinds of things we can put on the screen so we can all focus on one window or an arc. We're talking about being present online, at least for weekday minyan, in these small boxes. By the way, these are different stained windows just for a little bit of an art break here to think through what's the difference between having objects that we look at to really gain some sacred intention, or the prayer leader and the prayer leaders and the people who will be there. Because during the high holidays, we're not going to be on the mosaic setup like we have been for weekday minyan, for those who have been to the weekday minyan. We're going to be in screens where there's 4 boxes, let's say, and you're going to click the link and you're going to see me and you're going to see Mark Ashley and you're going to see the few folks who are set up in the synagogue so that we can use that space and the people's presence who are there in Or Zarua to gain a little bit of that feeling like we're part. So however you are thinking and contemplating about this high holiday season, I'm sure for any of us, it's going to be really incredibly different and has those still the great potential to be a spiritual experience amidst all of what the changes are going around us, the swirling distinctions and differences, and of a different color, let's say this Rosh Hashanah, this Yom Kippur will be. It will not be, for many, the typical walking into the sanctuary or Wallace Hall. I didn't have a picture of Wallace Hall, you'll forgive me. We've only been there on Yom Tov. But for those who come to the sanctuary, it won't be for everyone that, and it won't be, of course, a pilgrimage to some other place where there are actual and physical gates. It will be a pilgrimage of sorts to the sacred space of whatever electronics we are allowing, because we are saying on these coming holidays and these coming Shabbatot, 2 of them to be specific, 2 Sabbaths, that we're going to not find sources that allow us to necessarily say kosher, 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 we're streaming, but we're saying we're going to thrust aside a little bit the framework of all we trust as our normative set of laws. And we're going to set aside the mitzvot aseh and the mitzvot lo ta'aseh, the positive mitzvahs, the negative commandments, the thou shalt nots. And we're going to just say, this is what we're doing this year at this shat hadachak, at this emergency hour, at this hour of need, if you don't want to call it emergency, because it's an hour of need in a different way. We're not going to be exactly like we've been experiencing the weekday or even this lecture with the mosaics, we're going to have a different experience of looking in at sanctuary space that is even going to feel different because people are going to be a little dressed for the way that we need to be dressed to keep each other safe inside when we're there with one another with masks on. And you're going to hear only the prayer leaders, and the prayer leaders are going to be screened, just like if you've got my video now spotlighted and you only see me because you haven't chosen the mosaic. You're going to just have that kind of experience of seeing a few frames, and hopefully that the space of the sanctuary will be of inspiration, because it is a place where we come when we know it is time to be together. And we are more a religion of time than we are of space. And one way that we will be able to remember that it's time for inspiration despite the differences is to remember what Heschel said, that Judaism is a religion of time, aiming at the sanctification of time. Unlike the space-minded man to whom time is unvaried, iterative, homogeneous, to whom all hours are alike, qualityless, empty shells, the Bible senses the diversified character of time. There are no 2 hours alike. Every hour is unique and the only one given at the moment, exclusive and endlessly precious. So I pray that when we get to the right times, that it's going to feel like these times are really set aside and they are different. And the commitment to make those times very different in the house, to settle into this experience, whatever this experience will be, and to set aside any other technologies that might interrupt, that we can do that. And we can really make this time sacred, whether it's Slichot or the Rosh Hashanah services or the Yom Kippur services. As you may have heard and as you may know, the conservative movement, with some fanfare, did announce that there was a way to stream. And I've been using the term Zoom streaming as opposed to Zoom meeting, because we are in essence going to be setting up cameras in the sanctuary and streaming what they call a webinar, but what the world in the Jewish world, the Christian world, the Muslim world, houses of worship world is calling streaming. And you see that the conservative movement, you might have known that with some fanfare, they said, we have a ruling allowing congregations to live stream services on Shabbat and holidays. And as you know, I haven't said, let's just do that for all Shabbats and holidays. But let's do that for these unique days. And I feel that that will give us unique inspiration for this time of year. The allowance to actually live stream comes with a whole lot of halachic requirements if you're to follow the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards as well, which we will be following. So I assure you that we've hired non-Jewish technicians, and we're going to have cameras craned there, and we're going to have no interfacing with my using dashboards or admitting and being the technology administrator. Because when they allowed it, and they didn't really write this except into this JTA article, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. They didn't cover this in the other papers that wrote about the streaming decision. They allow live streaming with a number of caveats, including that the equipment be set up in advance, or that a timer be used to avoid the active use of electricity on Shabbat and holidays, when it is traditionally forbidden. So to be within conservative halacha that on this level, by those rabbis who permit it, say that you can stream, they are requiring that all technology be set up in advance. And that's not just for the synagogue, but that's for the home as well. That, to me, is unrealistic. I can take care of it in the synagogue, but I don't really believe that everyone in every Jewish community can take care of this qualification, that they can set things up before Yontiv, leave it on in exactly the spot they need it, have it be exactly in a place where they don't need to touch a single button. There are all kinds of different devices. There's X numbers of timeouts that you have to deal with. There's adjustments to all kinds of volumes and mutes and buttons and things. And so I wrote a response as they asked rabbis to write responses to the opinions that they created. And there were a majority of people on the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards that did permit this, and a significant minority who does not permit it and who wrote dissenting opinions, and they didn't highlight that in any of the articles either. And here, the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards adopted the ruling by 19 in favor and 3 against and 3 abstentions. And then they asked for some response. So whereas Rabbi Joshua Heller, who wrote the heter, who wrote the permission and said there is a kosher way, he says the wider intrusion of technology into Shabbat and Yom Tov worship will require greater fences to preserve the sanctity of the day, he wrote. It is a short step from watching services to emailing, online shopping, and other activities which violate the letter and the spirit of the law. So I want to give everybody the kavanah up front that when you're on these services, that it's not time to look at anything else. That it's time to just be there and be present, and that we know that that's a challenge within our homes. I wrote the following: imagining that we can open our computers or devices before Shabbat and have everything work perfectly for each of the services or programs we want to participate in on Shabbat or Yom Tov is not consistent with intellectual honesty, lived experience, and where technology stands in 2020. Or to achieve that will require an investment of thousands of dollars a year in technology and staff to run it. For smaller sized congregations, it is an undue burden. Plus, you downplayed the pluralistic nature of our movement, who believes in both tradition and change, by not mentioning the many rabbis who hold that it is a violation of Sabbath and Yom Tov laws to use electronics. Would we inspire more people to actually, let's go back here, expand and educate themselves by way of creating some prayerfulness if we gave folks more Jewish instruction for this time in the pandemic? That's a more theoretical question in the yellow that we could come back to at another time when we think about if this is going to continue. What skills do we need? And what more do we need when it comes to the kosher times to engage with one another on electronics and through these platforms? What more do we really need in order to feel like we are fulfilling our mission to create and sustain community? But for Yom Tovs and Shabbats, I'm even based in some of what Danny Nevins was saying back from 2012, and which he still holds today. He really doesn't see it that it's possible to, quote unquote, write ourselves into the digital world by way of the malacha of writing, something we don't do on Shabbat as well, when it comes to using these electronics. He was worried that people would use their Kindles to read back in 2012, and he continues to be concerned that we'll violate a central principle of Torah law on the Sabbath and on Yom Tov when it comes to the writing into digital reality that we need to do. Now, electronic devices are embedded everywhere, Rabbi Nevins says, making it almost impossible to avoid electronic interaction. That's the core of my paper. The difference that I see between those two is that motion detectors that open doors and turn off taps and lights do not leave any permanent record. Anything that's going to leave a permanent record, he worries about the most. And so, where he's a little bit open and where others are a little bit open to the streaming situation has become that there's really no permanent record if you're not recording anything. But he still worries for those rabbis in the world of Jewish law and the conservative movement who feel like, quote unquote, we are writing in some way when it comes to delivering any kind of religious service over these lines, because we're writing our voices into digital code, we're writing our images into digital reality, and he's that serious when it comes to the considerations of halachic parameters, just like, again, we have set forward in the who we are and what we are as a Jewish movement, in addition to, on the local level, Jewish community. I just had to show you this. There was an article that came out about when it was all being debated for the first time, to stream or not to stream on Shabbat. That is, this comes from a couple of years ago. Ted Merwin wrote, one of my favorite jokes centers on a rabbi whose sermons are so scintillating that his congregants are loath to miss even a single one. Okay, so, I'm not claiming anything amazing here. I'm just saying that maybe sometimes there's what to really focus in on in terms of a message. Anyway, when a member is obliged to be out of town for the weekend, he sends a servant with a recording device to tape the services. The rest of the congregation soon catches on to the idea, and before long, the rabbi looks out into the pews and sees nothing but a sea of machines while his congregants are all out on the golf course. Now, I insert that here to say that it takes a little bit of deep thinking like we're doing now together tonight to really think about just how precious our services are, how precious the experience of being together in person is, how we're in the middle of a pandemic, how we're in the midst of needing to make some decisions for this hour. Based on that, Shad HaDechak, how we need Jewish law to still be part and parcel of who we are, because that's our commitment as a community, how there are some openings to create with technology the experiences we need, and how we still want to create some guardrails, because, how crazy would it be if everybody just sent their, a clone or their AI robot because they've programmed it to speak in his or her own voice? Where are we going with this is always the question. And what kind of possibilities and what kind of limitations do we really want? Rabbi Shuck, a colleague up in Westchester, wrote a dissenting opinion about streaming, just so you, again, see some of these halachic considerations going on within the movement. And he said, there's a wonderful story that illustrates the conflicting religious visions of the Hasidic and Lithuanian communities of the 18th and 19th centuries. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Kotzk encountered an eminent Mitnagdish scholar. The Hasidim and the Mitnagdim had a lot of broigus, who told him that he had studied the entire Shas. He learned the entire Talmud, he says to the Rebbe. And the Kotzker Rebbe pauses and turns to him and says, really, to what end did you learn the Talmud? I found myself asking this question each time I studied Rabbi Heller's responsum, meaning the responsum that allowed for consistent streaming of services every Shabbat and every Yom Tov. I believe that Rabbi Heller's motivation for this responsum is to enable our communities to pray together and thus stay bonded. But with all of Rabbi Heller's characteristic brilliance and compassion for the Jew struggling to stay engaged during this pandemic, I am afraid that the end result will be a profound deprecation, a depreciation of the sacred, which will be extremely challenging to recover. But I was not willing to sit and say, wow, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are coming, and we're just going to kind of do a zoom into Rosh Hashanah. We're going to do a zoom into Yom Kippur. That couldn't be it. Those days are sacred in a way that other days are just not as sacred to the entirety of the Jewish people, to the community at large, to our community who sees so many come and need that check-in and themselves create different space for a Yom Kippur experience, for a Rosh Hashanah experience. And so when it came to thinking about it, I said, there has to be a way to frame this. Not that it's totally kosher for me, as I said to you, since I'm 19 years old. No computers on Shabbat, and no phones, and no emails, and no films and TV, and no walking into spaces and places where those are being screened, and no leaving on the big game, even though, some in the modern Orthodox communities that I hung out with, they left the television on so that they could watch the US Open, or they could watch the ball game. I mean, not for me as an individual. And really with a sense that it's about our souls. And so we need to find a way, though, to be together for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And so I started to think, like, we just needed to have days where we were willing to be rebels. We were willing to set aside the mitzvahs, aseh, lo taseh. We were willing to really forego some of the total structures here. We were being told by the health task force that you only have 90 minutes at a time, a little less, if possible. The Orthodox Union is coming out with new tshuvot and halachic responsa that say, throw out all the piyutim, throw out all the extras, just do the very bare bones. But we're not going to daven everything straight through, just all of it as fast as we can. We've got to take from the score. We've got to take from the symphonies of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and put together just the right blend. And that's not going to allow us to do things in a way that we've done them before. This is the most unique Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur I've ever had to think about in my life. And I want all of the beautiful melodic notes that Mark can sing. And I don't want to have to be totally on the bars. I want to kind of take the notes and the melodies and the highlights. I want us to hear a little Torah, but we're not going to have a regular Torah service. We can't fit all those in. I want us to hear a little Haftarah, but we're not going to maybe read the whole thing. I want us to hear some of the highlight notes and most of Musaf. And so I started to think, how are we going to really do all of this, amazing spiritual work, the work of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and be there and reimagine our lives as Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur really allow us to do. And now I'm into, this kind of orange, how are we going to do it? So we're going to go towards a new life here. We're going to rearrange time a little bit. We're going to have a different experience, and we're going to say, Im lo achshav ematai. If not now, when? Like Hillel said, if not now, when? And sometimes what sounds like a philosophical phrase becomes an active phrase within halachic decision-making. And I'm not the first one. We could have lots of classes about how philosophical waxing kind of maxims become anchors or hooks to hang your hat on when you're making decisions that have to be made in the moment. If not now, when? And I did this at the Seder when I came out first before any movement had written anything about it. And Rabbi Chaim Ovadia, an Orthodox Sephardic rabbi, used the same thinking that I had at first, and then even moved to a way to make it kosher by setting up your computer beforehand and not touching it all of Passover. And I said, Rabbi Ovadia, I was in touch. I don't think that that's realistic. People are going to have to touch their electronic devices. Rabbi Heller of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, conservative movement, people are going to have to touch their devices. We may be able to set it up in the shul for a couple of days and spend the big money. But let's just say we're not concerned about this standard halachic framework. And let's say it's a aveira l'shem shamayim, that we're willing to forego everything for the sake of heaven. The principle appears in Masechet Nazir in 23b. It's anchored in the biblical story of Yael, who is surprisingly considered more blessed than our matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, because she saves the entire Jewish people when she cohabits with Sisera for the sole purpose of killing him. Now, that's brought forward as an extreme example of what we're willing to do in order to save the Jewish people. And I think it gets to some of that within our community. I think it gets to the fact that there are people whose Jewish identity and Jewish sustenance are at stake if we don't have something unique and spiritual and accessible and through technology this year for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. This is the general principle. Every religious action that's undertaken for the sake of heaven merits a person credit towards receiving his or her place in Olam Haba. Uklal hadivarim hu ki kol pu'ula sheyaseh ha'oseh ota l'shem shamayim zocheh ba l'chaye ha'olam haba. It truly is for your portion in the world to come if you'll do this for the sake of heaven. And because Jewish identities of so many in our community are at stake, I'm advocating for the specific transgression, yes, of 2 Sabbaths, that of Rosh Hashanah and that of Yom Kippur this year, so that we may continue to strengthen and enrich the Jewish identities of those who constitute Or Zarua. As Maimonides concluded in the source below, set aside one Sabbath for a person's sake so that that person will keep many Sabbaths. It's in the laws of rebels. We have to launch a little rebellion here. And I know you just may be saying, oh, I'm comfortable. I could be comfortable with technology every Sabbath. To me, that was just too much. But because of this specific Maimonides source, the Rambam has a source. He knows that sometimes or another, and I'm going down 100% more than the Rambam. He said, let's do it for one Sabbath. There's a Shabbat in Rosh Hashanah this year. There's a Shabbat in Yom Kippur. That we should set aside these Sabbaths in order to bring people back and keep people apart. Kederech she'amru chachamim harishonim, chalel alav Shabbat echad kedei sheyishmor Shabbatot harbeh. We're going to really have a lot more Jewish life if we can see ourselves through setting aside the mitzvot of a Sabbath, in this case, 2 Sabbaths. If we can set aside a little bit the total, and here's where I think it really does fit into a modern context. If we can set aside the total expectations of what Rosh Hashanah services exactly are and what Yom Kippur services are exactly, and we can be open to this orchestration of these unique highlight, if you want to call them experiences, these melodic experiences, these shorter, abbreviated 90-minute, because we're broadcasting from the sanctuary experiences, and we bring ourselves together and we focus in on these experiences, whether we're in the sanctuary or we're at home using this interface. If we see ourselves as part of the outer chain, the outer courtyard and the inner courtyard and the inner courtyard, we can really create this kind of spiritual experience for the upcoming holiday. There's a final principle I'll tell you in halakha that says, V'omer eit la'asot la'Hashem heferu toratecha. It is a time to work for the Lord. They have made void your Torah. Rava says that this verse can be interpreted from beginning to end and can be interpreted from end to beginning, meaning there's a time to set aside some standard Torah and work for God and godliness and spirit. There's a time that spirit comes and says, I've got to set aside the detailed laws that I'm so used to. And within the context of really holding true to them, as we do in our context as Or Zarua, this kind of moment is a kind of moment of inspiration because we're able to orchestrate ourselves in a very different way on these Yom Tovs that are going to come. How are we going to create a feeling of real engagement in all we know and makes us comfortable and gives us inspiration with breaking a little bit of the standards that we set up? Because it's Eit La'asot La'Hashem. It's a time to do it for God. Heferu et Toratecha. It's a time to kind of turn and overturn a little bit of the exact Torah we know, the exact ways we do things on the high holidays. I'm suggesting that you get your screens repaired if you're going to be engaged digitally in the virtual space for these upcoming services. You know, looking at our screens for such a long time can create a sense of boredom, and it's a tedious kind of exercise when it comes to pulling ourselves into the experience that's being screened. There's no one here to wake us up by, throwing us a little bit of, a good yontif, a shana tova. There's no one that's going to pop out of his or her seat and you're going to say, oh, there she is, there he is. So what's going to keep you engaged is the willingness that we come into this with, the kavanah. And now I'm at that red arrow and turning towards what I promised, some suggestions for creating the prayerfulness and prayer space and the kavanah we need to really engage in the way we're going to engage this year. This is a mizrach. When you set up your technology, don't rely on where your technology lives right now, simply because it's always lived there. find out which is the eastern wall that faces Jerusalem and set up your technology towards the Mizrach. Go online and print out your favorite Mizrach and hang it up where you have your eastern wall. I've just chosen a couple. You can put in the word Mizrach into the Google search bar. Yeah, here's a contemporary one that I like a lot. You can print them out and hang them up. Here's the classic 7 species of Israel and a little bit of Jerusalem for you. Here's one by my sister's father-in-law, Mordechai Rosenstein. Funky words and the mystical kind of letter forms. But that's hanging up a Mizrach to make your space face east, if you will, when you're looking at the screen, to face east. And to have that Mizrach out there above it, you can have a point of focus beyond just the screen. And you can be focused a little bit on the power of having that kind of attachment to facing east that we have as a Jewish people in our prayer tradition. If you also want to have something else on your wall for your home that you haven't hung up thus far, and you want a unique blessing for it, there are also online unique Jewish blessings for the home. This one has both Hebrew and English. It's also a nice focal point. And again, sometimes you need to look away from a screen and look towards something else. So you have now a Mizrach on your wall, and you have a blessing for your home on the wall. I also highly recommend for Yontifs having, and you want to do this, set it up so that it's safely near you. Have some Yizkor candles burning, not just for Yom Kippur. Bring people whose presence matter to you, who are no longer here. Bring their presence into your prayer space. I do this sometimes on any given day of the week. There are certain bimas that were in Eastern Europe and that are today in Israel and around the Jewish world in America, where they have a lineup of Yizkor candles. And they light Yizkor candles for those in the community whose Yizkor, whose yahrzeit is being commemorated. I just love the idea that I can bring souls of my loved ones into my prayer life, in my personal prayer space, in my home. And so when I do daven in my house, which I do quite often, I will be home for Mariv, for instance, I will light a yahrzeit candle. There's nothing magical about keeping that yahrzeit candle, if I'm just going to light it for Mariv, for instance. There's nothing magical about leaving it lit for 25 hours. I know that sounds like a taboo, like you light a yahrzeit candle and you let it go for 25 hours. I can use the same yahrzeit candle for multiple lightings just to remember the people I want to remember, given a particular Mariv that I start. But for Yontif, in the home where we're going to create prayer space, I'm going to let those candles burn all of Yontif. I'm going to have, a 2 or 3 day candle going over the course of Rosh Hashanah, so that I can have some prayerful space in my house. And I give you these pictures because I don't know if you have a Yizkor candle holder or you just buy the little one in a can that comes already canned and ready to go, or in a glass jar. But these, you can find beautiful Yizkor candle holders, and this could be the year that you get one because you're creating different prayer space within your home. They are battery operated in case people are nervous about leaving flames in the wall, and that can be switched on. Reb Moshe Feinstein, one of the greatest poskim, one of the greatest halachic decisors of our era in the 20th century, said that lighting 2 battery-powered or electric-powered Shabbos candles in the hospital or in a hotel room is kosher and advisable. If there was a worry about fire safety, then we could do it. So I grant you that it may not be your aesthetic, but if you want to go that direction, you can go that direction. I hope that you were able to order your machzor and you saw all the advertisements that we made about getting that machzor either shipped to you or delivered to the synagogue. You'll hear more about picking yours up. But when it comes to this machzor, I remind you each year at services that there are wonderful passages on the sides that if you don't have a magnifying glass or good readers and you want to get them, go for it. Now's the time to get one of those handheld magnifiers, so you don't have to keep changing glasses to be back and forth between the computer and the prayer book. And practice some of the prayers that you want to be able to say for yourself, if that really is helpful to you. You might want to practice the Yizkor prayer. You might want to practice one or another that is really important to you. And whether we say it or not, you could find some prayerful time in your home and say the prayers. You want to make this year and your prayer space special, and you've got a flat table and you want a shtender, put in the word SHTENDER. There are lots of different shtenders. These are prayer book stands. You'll find all kinds of interesting religious sites on the web if you put in like sacred book stands. So I suggest using the Yiddish word shtender. And then you'll find the Jewish sites that have all the different options for Jewish kind of shtenders. And the reason why you might want to do that is because there are even some that kind of stand up with you when it's time to stand up for davening. I have one of the ones on the right that I really love, and I'm using it when I'm sitting down, and then all of a sudden there's a double tier kind of metal bracketing system to use when I stand up for my Amidah, so that if holding the Siddur is hard, which I know it can get tiresome to hold the Siddur for those many services that you have, or all the services you want to daven, so that you order one. Here, there's a place called thejewishist.com that reviews all the different kinds of shtenders that are out there. How about getting a shofar of your own? Not only just relying on shofar in the streets is 4 p.m. on Sunday. I hope everybody saw that flyer too. If you didn't, scroll down in the announcements about what's happening this Yontif. So I hope you got your link if you're going to be linked in with us for the Zoom streaming seminars. And I hope you made a reservation if you're going to be in person. And I hope also that you saw there's a flyer with nearly 30 locations. I think it's up to 30 now for shofar in the streets, which I ultimately hatched as an idea among all the Orthodox and conservative and Reform synagogues on the east side that we could get to participate. And Sigal designed this beautiful flyer, and we got all the places. And I thank Rabbi Rachel Ain for helping me organize and helping us organize that, and Rabbi Joe Potasnik of the Board of Rabbis, who cleared it with the mayor's office and things like that. So 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon for the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we'll be out in the streets blowing shofar. And maybe it's the year that you want to get a shofar and learn how to do it. You can make an appointment with me, and I'll help you through on Zoom. Yontif candles, you might want to order some special Yontif candles. We light one for everybody in the family and have multiple candles going on a tray. Some people have 2. Some people light Israeli spot candles, and some people have their own, regular white Yontif candles, but you need a yahrzeit candle to light for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So I bid you find a yahrzeit candle at least for that, if you don't light them simply to call upon souls who are present. And then you might want to search the web. If you want any other focal points to hang up on your wall, we had this wonderful gallery exhibit at Or Zarua of late 19th century, early 20th century Shana Tova postcards that I found also on Pinterest, and I found lots of them are available. I hope you have a higher and higher kind of sense of New Year and Tashlich over here. And remember that Tashlich, after the Carl Schurz shofar blowing at 4 o'clock on Sunday, I will be there and have liturgies, and people can find a private spot themselves on the East River to do Tashlich. You could bring your breadcrumbs and try to find a private place to Central Park, but we're not gathering as a big group in any one place because they've asked us not to by the water. But you could do Tashlich all week. So you could do Tashlich all week before Kol Nidre. So go during the week too and have some real time there. It's a wonderful ceremony to do yourself, and the Tashlich services, of course, in the Machzor. Happy New Year. And shout it out to those who you need to, and figure out the way to do that. You're not going to be able to do that in a mosaic format. We're not going to all be unmuting and muting and unmuted and then remuting. That's not the mode that we're going to have during these services. But figure out who you want to get in touch with and wish them a Shana Tova, and wish each other a Shana Tova in any which way, shape, or form that we can, since we won't be able to all be there physically together, but truly, spiritually, I pray that we will be able to be there together, that we sense that we are both abiding by and living in the framework of the Jewish law that means so much to us, the structures of our ritual traditions that this year may be a little bit recombined and presented anew, melodically and spiritually, and with some degree of invitation over these lines for you to participate and for us to create the sanctity of the experience for us all in our, even when we're coming in electronically, to feel like we are coming into sacred architecture, the sacred architecture that we need to bolster our experience and to reframe the engagement with our computers towards Mizrach, towards Jerusalem, and towards the prayers of our heart, and using it for the prayers of our heart when we create the kind of prayer spaces that will be granting us the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur experience of 5781. So that is my, I hope, comprehensive look at what it means to have this experience and get ready for this experience. I have tried to explain a little bit about what it means to think of virtual space as sacred architecture. I've gone over why we have these Zoom minions and why those Zoom minions are done in a different way than the up and coming High Holy Day services, which we'll conduct and enter into together. I've talked about what it means to be ready for a different structure, to think about coming into that sacred space, even through technology, and to create in your home a prayer space that can truly be full of the wonderful aesthetic that we need sometimes to lift us higher, despite the focal points of those who will be on screen, or in addition to, really. So I'll take a few comments, reflections, questions, and hopefully be able to end the evening with a little bit of dialogue with you.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi. This was really wonderful, wonderful background and drash. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Rabbi, I have a thought, and again, as I just stated, really enlightening and stimulating and holy sense of what we're doing. So my suggestion is that everyone, the day before the evening of Rosh Hashanah, cleans their computer screen. And it becomes just a gesture that we're looking at a clean screen.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Yeah. You should have get yourself a new, quote unquote lens cloth. Make it a time to buy a new one.
Thank you, Rabbi. I enjoyed the talk so much. It was so informative.
Thank you, Cheryl. Really appreciate it.
Putting this technology in the context of scrolls and stuff, I don't know where you'd find it in the archives, but early in the days of the internet, the public library did a thing about the internet, and they started with smoke signals and worked their way all the way through printing and,
Nice.
other forms of communication. And that's
Nice.
what that reminded me of.
Well, it's important that we contextualize this in very, very much broader ways, because technology, while it gains us and gives us, it can also sometimes, steal away. I'll just give you one example more, since you mentioned smoke signals. It used to be that we helped each other find places where we needed to go with some smoke signals. Then maps became the new technology, and maps were wonderful new technologies. And we learned how to really do them with very
wedges.
And then we ultimately created a fast forward GPS and Google Maps. And now no one remembers how to get anywhere.
Right.
And so all you gain, you also have to understand that there's potential loss. Mm-hmm. And that's really important to remember when we think about the engagement we have with the technologies that we're creating.
It's good seeing so many people.
Well, this is what we call wait time. In case anyone wants to follow up with me personally, I'm happy to, I'm glad to. I really do pray that this is an opportunity for us to really truly be biyachad, to be together in yet another and fascinating way. And that because it's these unique days of Slichot and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that it lifts us into a different place, and it's going to be such a unique experience. I'm so grateful for your attention and your commitment to learning and bringing your kind of whole self to these kinds of learnings and this kind of opportunity. And if you do something unique, or you come up with another idea about how to further the possibility of prayerfulness and engagement for these unique days, I'd be really, really glad to hear from you. So I wish everybody a Laila Tov and on to holy, holy pursuits.
Laila Tov, thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
I should say, Dory, since you said
Thank you so much.
we should have a session where we really explore, it really did make for an inspiration for the sparks that got me thinking in both the broader levels and the more narrow focus of the halachic sources. So thank you.
Well, I really appreciate your taking the suggestion to heart, and I think it bore great fruit. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Yeah. Laila Tov, everybody. Great seeing you all.
So proud of you.
Oh, Shalom, Mom. So nice to have your mother at a shiur.
Good work.
Yeah. Okay, let's go.
Laila Tov.